Good afternoon, everybody. This is Connor Sharp in your municipal government class. This week is week 15, and we'll be discussing approaches to emergency management and public safety today. The contents of my PowerPoint include police, fire, EMS, brief histories and purposes, disaster and emergency management, National Incident Management Systems, or NIMS for short, responding to Hurricane Irma, improvements of EMS in rural areas, and application questions later. First, we'll be discussing the textbook chapter by Raymond Rose. Since the beginning of time, there has always been a need for police services. In the 1800s, Sir Robert Peel formally established the London Metropolitan Police Department. He did so after the military. He felt that the structuring would make the local police department more efficient and effective as a police force. Prior to this, the only form of protection that the locals had at night were night watchmen and local constables, but again, this was much less effective than a formalized police department. Police Services Mission. The police services mission includes three key pieces: law enforcement, crime prevention, protection of life and property. And the textbook goes further by stating the police department is broken down into two sectors: operations and administrative functions. Under the operations umbrella, this includes patrol divisions, which is the major unit of the police department, but this also includes traffic control and traffic enforcement. Under the administrative functions umbrella, this includes the support functions, such as criminal investigation, youth investigations, crime prevention, safety education, records management, and evidence collection and identification. Fire services history. The fire service in America began as volunteers. Some of the first were established in Norfolk, Virginia, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and pictured left is Benjamin Franklin, who founded one of the first volunteer fire departments in Boston, known as the Union Fire Brigade, also known as the Bucket Brigade, for their leather buckets that they kept at the front of their houses in case there was a fire in the area. They'd form a human chain and pass water buckets from the local water source to the fire, as pictured below. Fire Services Mission. Firefighters serve three primary purposes: fire suppression, prevention, and inspections. Fire suppression is going to be your typical firefighter that you think of when you see a fire truck. Fire prevention deals more with education and is arguably the most important part of the fire service. Fire inspections are the guys who regulate code and do regular checkups on new building inspections. Emergency Medical Services, or EMS, histories. EMS became necessary due to a high mortality rate in vehicle accidents. Around the mid 60s, the federal government signed the Highway Safety Act in 1966. This was followed by the Emergency Services Act of 1983. All of this was modeled after the post World War II quick extractions from military zones, similar to on the show MASH. They saw a rise in survival rates, and this is how emergency services were initially established. Emergency Medical Services Mission. EMS's mission is primarily to provide emergency medical care, as the name implies. This involves pre-hospital care, and this is going to be evaluation, treatment, and transport to the hospital of patients in need due to illness, injury, or anything else. In the next article, we're going to be discussing disaster and emergency management systems in urban areas by Naim Kapush. Disaster and emergency management. Emergency management is the organization and management of the resources and responsibilities of dealing with all humanitarian aspects of emergencies. The aim is to reduce the harmful effects of all hazards, including disasters. New definitions are also including terroristic events and cyber terror. The article is heavy about the word governance, stating It's management of networks, and that it's key for emergency management to function on multi-level governance. This is a key, especially when referring to FEMA's NIMS system, implementing a unified effort between multiple agencies. In regards to emergency management, there are a multitude of problems. This can be salaries for employees, such as civil servants, volunteers, staffing, as seen in the ELGL podcast, specialty certifications. This also falls in line with the budget, equipment, and facilities for these emergency management shelters. These shelters include food, cots, and in some cases, such as Hurricane Katrina, haircuts, to full on shower facilities, depending on the necessities of those inside these shelters. The chapter later goes on to say uh, it's dealing with the war on drugs. This has been ongoing since about the Nixon, the 60s era, or the Say No to Drugs era. And as some of the previous presenters have stated, some of this information is pretty outdated with the cocaine references. Now there's more of a street drug and opioid crisis. Opioids meaning it can come from heroin, fentanyl, or even prescription drug use that's abused. As of recently, they've developed carfentanil, which a grain the size of a piece of salt is enough to overdose you. And this goes back to the budgeting portion. To bring someone back from an overdose from an opioid, you need some Narcan, and this is just some more supplies that you need to account for, especially for your emergency managers, especially for your emergency managers such as public servants, police officers, firefighters, and emergency medical services. This is FEMA's National Incident Management System. As you see on top is the incident commander. As we work our way down the chain of command, delegated duties make their way through the command staff onto other agencies. This NIMS system assists in applying a unified command to major incidents such as hurricanes, disasters, terrorist threats, anything under the emergency management umbrella. On this slide, I'm going to be discussing this week's ELGL GovLove podcast. It's entitled Responding to Hurricane Irma. On the left, Ben Kittleston interviews interviewee Dan Biles. He's the county manager of Pasco County, Florida. He earned his bachelor's and master's in civil engineering from Texas A&M University. Go Aggies. And in this interview, he discusses preparations prior to landfall of Hurricane Irma in Florida. He also discusses some of the challenges, including creative uses of minimal staffing, especially in relation to communications for his county. During the storm, Dan worked under the Assistant County Administrator for Public Safety, and his name was Kevin. During this preparation, Kevin gave Ben the mantra, plan for the worst, hope for the best, but hope is not a strategy. Since they're in Florida, Dan described that his county doesn't typically like to go to shelters. It's a good thing they followed Kevin's mantra because during the storm, Dan states, they planned on sheltering only about 200 to 300 because, again, people don't typically like to go to shelters in Florida. In actuality, following the storm, they housed 24,000 people and 1,800 pets. He managed to do all of this via the compliance with school districts, as the school districts act as the shelters during natural disasters and hurricanes for this county due to its size. He goes into further detail explaining their EOC, or Emergency Operations Center, and goes into things similar to the article we already talked about, governance and the management of networks, trying to get multiple agencies to function together as one. He went into further detail about how the police PIO, public information officer, was the one who did most of the TV time for the emergency management department. All in all, Pasco County bounced back about 9 to 10 days post storm as if it didn't happen, per Ben. Excuse me, Dan. This last slide covers Improving Emergency Service in Rural Areas by Sumaran Shanta. Longer transport distances and fewer hospitals with fewer medical capabilities has long been an issue for rural EMS. To counter this, departments have been thinking about the addition of a greater number of units and stations to encompass territory, therefore serving more citizens. That's an obvious one, but with this in mind, they're trying to maximize the persons covered per unit within a territory or coverage within a square mile radius. This paper goes further into detail about Hanover Fire EMS, located in Virginia, as noted in the bottom left. For EMS departments in metropolitan areas, this has never been an issue, distances from a hospital. This is why it's often to see Lifelight out in rural areas rather than in ambulances due to the criticality of the patient. This paper goes into much further detail as far as station placement due to data, but I'll let you look further into that in relation to the numbers. And for just a few application questions. Besides Dan Biles' plan for the worst and hope for the best, but hope is not a strategy mantra, what is another way to go about preparing for a natural disaster of this forecasted magnitude? Would an imminent threat, such as Irma in this instance, alter your urgency? And for the next question, what are other ways you think a rural EMS department could better serve a more substantial amount of people with either the same amount of units or as few units as possible? How would varying rural terrains affect such ambulances and their coverage? Are there better options or specialized units to take into account? I want to thank y'all so much for watching my presentation. I hope y'all had a happy Thanksgiving. Good luck on the rest of the semester and finals. Y'all take care. Bye.